When it comes to remembering and experiencing your innate abundance, there's really no meeting place between the thinking of the world and your true abundance. Because as you're going through your day-to-day motions, if we look at the mindset that is going through the day, don't you, isn't it all lack-based? Aren't you going through your day focusing on problems, focusing on how you don't have stuff and how you're lacking in some way? And so you can kind of see how there's really no meeting place between the thinking of the world, which is all fear-based, and this experience, which isn't really that much talked about, which is remembering your true abundance. And a simple surface level example we can give is a newborn child. And how does a newborn child pay the rent? How does a newborn child feed itself? How does a newborn child, get provided with everything? And as we look into this, we can say, hey, a newborn child is provided for with the abundance of the parents, right? Using the analogy of the child, we can see that the newborn child is provided for with the wealth, with the abundance that is already there from the parents. And even though we do tend to grow up as children and call ourselves adults, despite being called an adult, you're still a child of life. You're still a child of the universe. You're still a child of light or of God, whatever word you want to use. And you take on a role that isn't really meant for you. You take on a role of being the provider. And so you compromise on your being. You compromise on your inner compass, don't you? What I mean by this is your innate inspirations and joy, tends to lose itself when you conform to get a job, when you conform to paying the bills, when you conform to following the status quo. And then later on in life, you end up, coming to your deathbed and you're like, whoa, I've spent all this time conforming to the way things are, conforming to basically a state of compromise. And wow, I wasted most of my life rushing to the end of the song and forgetting that, hey, I've just totally forgotten about dancing throughout the entire song and enjoying the dance. And so being a child of life that is infinite in nature, in the overall sense, you were never meant to work to survive. You were never meant to pay rent to live here. And this is just all conditioning, and all of these systems have been set in place in order to restrict, shall we say, your true being. And what I mean by this is, if we look at the birds in nature and we look at nature in general, you don't see the birds with their little bird banks. You don't see the birds having bird banks. You don't see them going out to work. You don't see them fighting wars. You don't see them in the skies going, okay, drop the birdie bomb. No, this is all conditioning that we have been taught and ultimately need to unlearn. And so we know that apples come from apple trees and pears come from pear trees. And so divine logic basically states that if you are compromising on your happiness, the only result that can come from this is unhappiness, right? What is not happiness is unhappiness. And so this is the entire human condition. We compromise and compromise and compromise on our happiness, and then we go, why am I so unhappy? But it's divine logic that if you are compromising on your happiness, the only result that can stem from this is unhappiness. The tree bears fruit, right? Apples come from apples trees. And so if we look at, there's a quote by Rumi that basically states that there's really no need to seek for love. Rather, we need to look at all of the obstacles that we have built against it. And the truth can be basically said for remembering and experiencing our true abundance. instead of seeking and instead of looking for abundance, let's look at all of the obstacles that seem to stand in the way of this experience. Because this experience, just like the newborn baby, the abundance is already there. Shall we say, the wealth is a present experience. The abundance, I should say, which is a state of mind, is a present experience. It's already there. It just seems to be covered over by these conditioning, by these unloving thoughts and these unloving beliefs that are in awareness. And so we really want to shift our perception around from trying to find and strive for stuff in the world, just turning back inwards to look at all of the obstacles that seems to stand in the way of this experience that is in our awareness. And so this is a great inroads into purpose, because we go about our daily experience just following the status quo. We don't really question, why am I actually doing this? Why am I actually going to school? Why am I actually doing things? So let's look at purpose. And so we can basically say, what is the purpose of education? Well, isn't it to get a job and a career? Or what's the purpose of a job and a career? Well, isn't it to make money and long-lasting employment? Well, what's the purpose behind making money and long-lasting employment but to pay the bills and do more things? And what's the purpose of paying bills and doing more things? To have a home and money to do more things, right? And so when we get down to this, we can question, well, what is the purpose of this even? What's the purpose of having a home and money to do more things? But isn't it to have security and safety? And so when we question or inquire into the underlying purpose underneath all of the doings in the world, we can come back to, well, the core purpose, that why we seem to be doing everything, is for safety and security, except we are doing it in such a way where we aren't finding the security and safety, aren't we? Because we have tried doing the status quo. Are we happy? Do we keep coming back for more? When we reach objects of happiness, aren't we still left unfulfilled? And so conditioning basically obscures the palm here. If I obscure my palm, it basically makes the fingers on the hand appear separate. Now, we all know that in the totality of it, without the conditioning, the hand is whole. But when the conditioning comes on top and is added into the mind, it appears as if the fingers on the hand now appear separate. And then the fingers go, oh my gosh, now I need to provide for myself. Now I need to strive for stuff. Now I need to do. Meanwhile, forgetting that in reality, it is always provided for by the hand. And this is the ego's purpose. The ego's purpose is always through striving through some external means in order to try and get something, in order to try and achieve something, whatever that may be, security, safety. And this is just another way of saying the ego's purpose is trying to seek and not find. And so through asking the purpose, all that really is for is just bringing our focus, bringing our attention off of perception and back inwards to what are the seeming obstacles in awareness to this ever-present experience of true abundance. And so I don't know about you, but in terms of practicality, when I left my job in 2017 and before I started traveling around and extending and speaking, I really had to go through this experience of dealing with all of the ego fears, of ending out on the street. I had to deal, well, I shouldn't say deal, but I had to face all of the darkness of the ego, all of the darkness of the mind that would, and the ego's hypothetical thinking. And so one thing about the ego is the ego reverses true cause and effect. And what I mean by this is, in reality, we are always responsible for what we experience. We always have the key to what we experience. But the ego reverses this and says, well, let's forget about our state of mind for a second and let's project the cause out onto the world. And it switches cause and effect. Instead of I am always choosing what I experience and the world is the effect, it switches us around and says, well, now as you're going through your day, everything that happens in perception is the cause of my upset or the cause of my happiness, and my state of mind is the effect. And we're going through our day and we're in traffic, as an example. We're in traffic and then suddenly some guy cuts in, and that is seen as the cause of my upset. It's affecting my state of mind, right? So the perception becomes the cause and our state of mind or our emotions become the effect. And this is what I mean by the false cause and effect relationships that the ego sets up in order to set up smoke and mirrors for where the key actually is in experiencing true abundance and experiencing consistent peace. And so we really have to, as we're going in, of course, we are working with intuitive guidance, which is the bridge between taking our focus off of perception and bringing it back in the mind. We will start to awaken to the ego's tricks, and one of us is reversing cause and effect. So as we are coming in, we want to reverse the ego's cause and effect. So we want to remember true cause and effect. And all that really means is just seeing that the problem is really in mind. It's not in the world. If we're stuck in traffic and someone cuts in front of us, the cause of my upset is really within my own mind, in which we will go deeper into later on. And it's not really in the world. And I'll use an analogy to try and convey what I'm saying here. And so an analogy that I want to use is going to a movie theater. And we go to a movie theater and we pay to go to the movies, right? To get lost in the movie. Now, it wouldn't really be a great movie if we went to the movie theater and we're just, oh, yep. I'm just watching a movie. We pay to go to the movies to get lost in the movie. And this is the same as this experience here. Although we pay through our emotions, obviously. And so using the analogy of the movie, we go to the movies to watch a movie. And when we're watching the movie, we kind of get lost in the movie. And instead of remembering that we are just the observer and the audience watching the movie, we then project ourselves onto the movie and we're yelling at the screen telling people, look, don't go in that room, and we have all of these emotions going on because we have misidentified with the characters and the events on the screen in the movie. And the problem is not really on the screen of the movie, it's how we are interpreting what is happening on the screen of the movie, right? It's how we are interpreting the world rather than what is actually happening in the world or in the movie, shall we say. And so until the mind gets clear on how the mind works, the mind is just going to perceive itself as a victim of all of these worldly events, shall we say, which is the day-to-day experience of human beings, isn't it? And so we want to get really clear on the levels of mind. And it wasn't until I started to see, oh my gosh, perception is just an effect or an inroads into emotion. Emotion is an inroads or an effect of thoughts. Thoughts stem from beliefs, are an effect of beliefs. And as we come to the beliefs, these beliefs on the mind level are just an effect of our focus, the mind's focus, or our attention, or our prayer, or our desire, shall we say. Now, what I mean by our focus is, on the mind level, there are always two ways to come at every experience, or two ways of perceiving, shall we say. There are always two ways of perceiving the movie. There were always two purposes in mind, which is a stepping stone for coming into choiceless awareness or the experience of consistent peace. And one of the purposes is the ego and its purpose of lack. And you can see how this lack gets projected out onto perception as if I am now a lacking individual that is deprived and needs to find an external means of meeting the lack. You can see how the ego brings in the idea of time here, because the ego, which is the denial of the present moment itself, says, let's forget about the present moment and the present experience of abundance that you already have, and now let's project out this present experience into a future goal and an external means to attain this future goal. And so while the mind is left dealing with the past regrets and future consequences and future anxieties, the false cause of the lack, shall we say, which is left obscured on the mind level. And then we end up wondering why we're working so hard and not really finding the happiness and completion that is being strived for. And this is because peace is never really found in the future or the past, as it's a present experience, hence why Eckhart Tolle and all of the spiritual teachers are talking about the power of now, the power of the present moment. And so the other purpose in mind is the spirit's purpose, or in layman's terms, the soul's purpose, which is about going back within to the mind to unwind and unravel the mind from this false filter of lack. Which is why Jesus in the Bible says, you see but through a darkened glass, through a darkened filter. And this darkened filter is really the ego and mind, and it's, this filter of lack. And so we're going back into the mind to unwind the mind from this misidentification with the ego, to replace the false belief in lack with the ever-present experience of abundance or the wholeness of being. And so if we use the analogy of a book, when you go and buy a book, right, all of the contents of the book are there already. It's only when we open the book and we read it word by word, page by page, that the illusion of time is created, and the pages that we have read become the past, the page and the word that we are on and currently reading become the present, and the pages to come become the future. And yet when you close the book, you collapse the linearness of the illusion of time, right? And you come to see that, wow, the entire book is already completed in my hand. It's only when I'm reading it page by page and word by word that it gives the illusion of time. And so as we collapse the book, we collapse the illusion of time, we come to see that the book is already there, completed. And this is really symbolic of non-linear time as a stepping stone into timelessness or the eternal present moment. And so when we come to our day-to-day experiences from the seemingly higher perspective of non-linear time, that everything is already there in the present moment, or as we should say, everything is completed, everything is past, everything it's already there in its totality, we can begin to relax, and we can begin to just observe all of the synchronicities as we're going through our day-to-day experiences that have always been there. These synchronicities have always been there, but they've just been covered over by the ego's insistence of interfering with what didn't really need to be interfered with, right? And so as we step back and as we relax and as we begin to observe the day-to-day experiences rather than going with the ego's insistence on interfering with stuff that doesn't really need to be interfered with, we begin to trust what is. We begin to trust what is given to us day by day, knowing that life in its totality has everything covered. It doesn't really need our individual interference in order for stuff to happen, right? This is just the ego's illusory insistence of trying to maintain control by interfering with stuff. And so as we begin to trust what has been given to us, as we begin to trust and observe the synchronicities, this is really just a springboard into, a springboard or trampoline into non-judgment. And what I'm really trying to convey here is we can just begin to relax into the moment. We begin to see that our safety is really in the present moment, and we begin to relax into the intuitive flow. And as we're going through our day-to-day experiences, this intuitive flow acts like a GPS. It brings us through everything that we need to get through in order to bring us to this place where we can just begin to experience that, hey, what is going to happen will always happen, and what is not going to happen will never happen, despite how hard you may try to make it happen. And so you can begin to just feel the joy. You can begin to feel how you can really not do anything wrong or not do anything right, because this is just all learned conditioning, right? Where did we learn what's right and what's wrong from? It's just past conditioning. And so if we pluck these ideas from the mind, you can begin to just feel this sense of, oh my gosh, how would it actually feel to be going through my day knowing I can't mess anything up, knowing that I can't do anything wrong? Wouldn't you experience great joy with that? And so as you begin to just relax and just drop this tenseness, you can just drop the tenseness. You begin to experience that you really can't mess anything up. Why? Because life has got you. You've never really had an individual sense of control. There was the illusion of control, but life has always had everything in its totality. And so this is really just a cause for joy, because through the Spirit's purpose, you're going to be given experiences in your day-to-day life that is going to show you that you are taken care of, that you are abundant, and that you are already, whole and complete as you are. And so this is going to bring you back to a space where you can just calmly observe the false from the false, as you are observing the movie screen, as you are observing the day-to-day experiences. You'll be left in a place where you can just calmly observe the false from the false, the ego as false, and then overlook it. And it is in this overlooking that the true term of forgiveness is experienced. And this is where your original innocence is remembered. And you remember, wow, life has always been the provider. And this has always been symbolized in the world, by nature and the birds. They've never gone to work. They've never had banks, and yet they've always been provided for, right? Now, I'm pretty sure in the Bible, Jesus does talk about, look at the birds, look at the lilies of the field. They neither spin nor toil, yet they are looked after, you see? And you can see where Jesus's pointers or teachings come into play here, because they are very, very beautiful teachings which point to how life is the provider. And so you can begin to see what true abundance or divine providence is all about, which is really, it's just all about love. If we go back to the main surface level example, it's all about the love that the parent has for the child, that provides everything for the child. And you being a child of life has always been provided for by the parent, which is life. And it's all about this love, because you are so loved and you are love itself, basically. And so when you begin to awaken from and overlook the ego, the wholeness and oneness of yourself is revealed. And, what is left is just shining, just your light shining and radiating out to everyone and everything. And you recognize that you're not really being provided for as a person, but you as the one self, you as the whole being, you as life is always providing for itself, because life takes care of life, and you are life. Heck, you are abundance itself. You are divine providence itself. These synchronicities that were just showing up in the world were just being provided to point to the experience of the needlessness of being. And when you begin to experience this needlessness of being, or the present moment, shall we say, you begin to experience the joy of the present. And the present isn't really anything boring, right? The ego's interpretation of the present, maybe it's boring. But when you come into the needlessness of being, or this experience where you have no cares and concerns because you know that the universe has your back, or life has your back in every single moment, you start to become a child again, and you start to experience the joy of being a childlike innocence, right? Lest you be reborn, right? And so what is really left from this is just this bubbling of joy within, and this radiating of this love from your heart, and you just let your light shine forth. But what I have just basically spent the last half an hour pointing to is just that the experience of divine providence, or the experience of your innate abundance, is really about love. It's really about how you are loved and love itself. It's really about, using the analogy, how loved you are by the parent. And the parent in beyond the metaphor is just life itself, because you are life itself. You are the abundance of the present moment. You are the present moment itself. It was just seemingly obscured in awareness by all of these conditioned beliefs and unloving thoughts that were covering over the love of the present moment. And, it was just covering over the present, and we were lost in the past and lost in the future smoke and mirrors of the ego, not really understanding what was really going on. And we were stumbling in the dark, trying to find our way out of the dark, while not realizing that the key has always been within. Everything you have needed has always been within. It's just we were looking in the wrong direction. However, life has always been there as a safety net, just like in the movie Indiana Jones, where he has to step out onto that invisible walkway, but it's not until he actually steps out and walks onto the walkway that he realizes that the walkway is actually there. It's just invisible. And so once he steps out onto the walkway, he then chucks dust onto the walkway to reveal the walkway and let others follow.